Well, today we're talking again about faith and reason, and we're talking about four assumptions of modern science. And I'm joined in the studio by Corey Miller of Ratio Christi. Corey, scientists are all about the facts, right?
Right. Science in its practice does not take place in a vacuum, Brian. We get this mythological idea that when a scientist puts on her white lab coat and begins working with her measurements, that she's just going to go out and observe the world and deliver for us the facts and nothing but the facts. But there are limitations internal to science itself and also external presuppositions underlying science that come from the outside. An example of some of the internal limitations would be that regardless of the advances in neuroscience, there are certain things that science can never know about my innermost thoughts. And that is because I have private access. There's something of what it's like to be me. Furthermore, it cannot ever provide certainty due to inductive reasoning that is part of the nature of science and practice. That form of reasoning is very powerful in science. It gives us a lot of good results, but it can't provide proof or certainty, the kinds of things we think of in mathematics. And so, to be clear about this, there are certain things that science cannot know, and anything that science does know, it cannot know for certainty. And so science not only has its internal limitations, but also comes along with outside external presuppositions underlying science.
Yeah, and so that's what we're talking about is those assumptions, right? And you've identified four of them, and I love these, so talk us through these. The first one is this, explain this. You say that science assumes that nature exists. Well, doesn't nature just exist?
Yeah, it seems to be commonsensical, and maybe it is, but we take that for granted, and it needs to be argued. For example, how do I know that I'm not being deceived right now by an evil demon, or that I'm not still sleeping and in a dream state thinking that all of this is reality? Or perhaps my brain is in a vat controlled by some super scientist who's plugging me with electrodes, giving me a virtual reality, which is to say, not reality. Many don't now, and they haven't throughout history, believed in the full reality of the external world. This is quite typical for external or for Eastern thinkers. And so it just can't simply be assumed. It's got to be argued.
Okay, so then what about the second one? You say that science assumes that nature has an intelligible order that can be known.
Nature has an intelligible order that is knowable or can be known by us, but appearances and reality are not always the same. It seems commonsensical again, but again, I think we take things for granted that are grounded in philosophical framework. We think that we have access to things like, say, the periodic table, where we find things out in nature that are arranged in a certain way where we can just tag a number onto it like H2O or gold is the atomic number 79 or something like that, as if we can know certain things in themselves. But that is a issue in philosophical dispute. There is a world in itself, and others think that, we don't have access to the world in itself. We have access to the world as it appears to me, to my experiences. And so we're always trapped behind our experiences. And this is why, some in sociology would claim that knowledge is but a social construction of reality.
All right, so what about your third one? You say science also assumes the existence and applicability of the laws of logic.
Right, and these laws constitute a category that comes from philosophy, not of science.
Right.
Scientists borrow them as tools using in the discipline of science. But these laws, which seem to be more knowable than anything in science itself, they seem to be invariant, maybe abstract entities that are true for all people at all times and all places. And yet I can't taste them, I can't touch them, I can't smell them.
Yeah, it sounds like faith.
It does, and I can know them for certainty, and they're not sense perceptible. They're inescapable, but once again, they're issues that are dealt with in the field of philosophy, that science presupposes before it even starts to do its work.
And you've got one more, and I know that there are more than these, but you just identified four. You say the last one is that science assumes the reliability of our senses to deliver truth, which is important when you think about the scientific method, right?
Right. So when we think about the sense of taste and touch and sight and smell, well, this brings up a question. how do I know that my sense perception is even reliable? How do I know that it's functioning properly or correctly? And even if it is functioning properly, how do I know that my faculty of sense perception is aimed at truth? For example, if scientific naturalism is true, then perhaps my sense perceptions are aimed at survival. Everything's about survival. Yet natural selection selects things that bring survival advantage. But then you can think of examples of reasons why sense perception doesn't need to be guided or aimed at truth for me to survive. Consider being in the wild and me having a false sense of depth perception, and I see a predator coming my way, and I have a false sense of perception. It seems to be much nearer to me than what it really is, and so I'm going to flight for survival. Well, that's giving me a false sense of perception about reality, and that might cause us to question whether these sense perceptions actually give us truths about the world as it is. Now, the theist, the Christian, has a very good response on a lot of these assumptions, and they are philosophical assumptions as to why we might be able to trust our sense perceptions, why we have rational thought at all, because we begin with a worldview of mind and not matter, why we can map onto the external reality that is there and make inferences and deductions and later technology. But again, all this involves underlying presuppositions that fall outside of science and begin before science can even get off the tarmac.
So Corey, then what is the Christian's view of these assumptions then? How does a Christian view this differently than maybe someone who doesn't have belief in God?
Yeah, I think these various assumptions or presuppositions can only be justified by a prior commitment philosophically or even theologically. And for the Christian position, you have an easy response to these, namely that we've been created in the image of God, of a rational being who has given us a mind that can map onto external reality that's there for us to know, explaining why modern science arose in Christian medieval Europe and nowhere else, for example, not in the East. And so the Christian has an easy response for this stuff. Science, a good field, is dependent on philosophical presuppositions. It has to trust in these things, not unlike religious commitment.